new feature.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host, Sean Francis. I am Brian Altunian. And today in our fourth season, we are starting a monthly segment series. Thank you. Monthly series. I was getting there. A monthly series on the things that men typically don't talk about. For those of you who have watched our podcast or listened to our podcast, you probably get that Sean and I are not typical men. So we enjoy the work that we do here, and we're going to have a great conversation on things that men don't talk about. And if you're a caregiver, this applies to you tenfold. So stay tuned for another episode of Just Two Dads. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads. I'm Brian Altunian here along with Sean Francis. And before we get started today's conversation, a bunch of people we want to thank. First of all, if you're catching us live on Facebook, lately, over the last month or so, this is about the only thing that I post on Facebook anymore is the show. But thanks for joining us. Put some comments in there if you'd like. Reach out to us. Let us know if there's something that you would like us to talk about. If you're catching us after the fact on our webpage at justtodadspodcast.com or on our YouTube channel, please like and subscribe and share with your friends. If you're catching us on Google outlets or on WSTX AM radio down in the U.S. Virgin Islands, thanks for making us part of your listening day. We appreciate all of you and hope that we bring value to you every week. Sean and I have been doing this for 4 years, over 180 episodes of conversation around caregiving for family members with some sort of exceptional need. And so looking forward to, thanks. You put that up on the, did you put that up on this thing? Thank you particularly to Billy Footwear. We are huge fans of Billy Footwear. Billy Price, the founder, his story is so amazing. Seriously, if you haven't had a chance to do it, stop by and check out Billy Footwear. Billy creates adaptive footwear for people of all ages, of all kinds, of all needs. They've got amazing styles, and it's really helpful for somebody who has difficulty tying their shoes or putting their shoes on. There's a zipper effect. It's really amazing. If you click on the link on our show notes, you'll get a 10% discount in addition to whatever sales that they happen to be having at the time. But again, huge fans of Billy Footwear. And we have a partnership now with Billy that we're going to be generating additional content with and for them. So you'll be seeing that in the coming weeks as well. So I think that is it for the most part. Last thing I want to say, if you want to email us, you can find us at wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. We are just two dads at gmail.com. So hopefully that covers all of our pre-show conversations. So today we're going to talk about some things that men generally don't talk about or typically don't talk about. Before we do that, Sean, how are you feeling? Are you feeling good about today's topic? You feeling good about our subject matter?
I am. And then segueing into that, just backpedaling a little in terms of things that, we've got so many things going on. You'll find if you go to the website, justtodadspodcast.com, you'll see an opportunity to register for our registration is free for our men's group, which is called The Den. That ties into a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today, which is the first of our series, which is simply things that men don't talk about. I thought it'd be cool to have this nice creative name, but whether it's keeping it simple and matter of fact, as honest as can be, whether it's things dudes don't talk about, things bros don't say, I don't know, maybe we'll come up with something else. But we realize that it's a conversation that has value. And this entire experience, the podcast, membership into the special needs community, so to speak, is just one big onion, as is life, that just keeps getting peeled back layer by layer by layer by layer. And Brian and I have talked about this. The term caregiver is something that I, Mr. Advocate, sat on the board of the Autism Parents Advisory Board of Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. I'm a 2024 fellow with Caring Across Generations. The term caregiver I didn't associate myself with that term. I didn't even separate myself from it. It just didn't wasn't there. Just like, you're so busy doing what you do, and you sometimes you don't realize. And the conversations that Brian and I had, which is kind of where the show started from, was like, men don't usually have these kind of conversations. And anything that affects the special needs community or those who are caregivers affects people, the other way around. Anything that affects the general population affects our community tenfold. And so if society doesn't encourage men to be open about things that they have, in terms of fears, hopes, desires, and things of that sort, then there's probably the world will be a better place if we're able to do that. So that's where the Den came from. We meet every other Sunday on Zoom, but that's also where this series came from. So we have a list of topics that we're going to cover over the next couple of months. We don't know how many months we'll be doing this, but this is the first one. If you have ideas for things that you'd like to see us tackle, or a conversation you want to chime in on, feel free, whether it's in comments or emailing us. And today, what we're going to start with is two topics at the very least: struggling with anxiety or depression, as well as then the emotional toll of caregiving. And I have to say, I'm constantly blown away by the level of um, awakening that I go through when realizing things that apply to me. For instance, even anxiety and depression. I a lot of the, I guess, your ability to identify how much it relates to you ties to is tied to what comes to mind when you hear the word. And for the longest time, if you think of anxiety or depression, I'm thinking somebody that has to be medicated, someone that's probably very low energy, appears to be obviously and visibly depressed all the time. But that is not the case. And I think that's part of the reason why men have difficulty talking about it, not just because of what society deems to be the norms, but there's such a heavy uh, level of masking that's taking place that you don't necessarily see it. So let's kind of start with that. For myself, Brian, what's your take on that, generally speaking? And then, having been a caregiver or parent to one with a diagnosis of special needs, how does that all, because I've been rambling for the last, feels like 2 days, I'll let you kind of start with your experience there or what you've seen.
Well, I mean, I think that, I think since the pandemic, we've seen a lot of incidents of, anxiety and depression showing up in a variety of segments of our population that hadn't really outwardly, displayed that,
Mhm.
or wasn't really discussed, like our kids, our teenagers who, were impacted by the pandemic. There's been a high incidence of mental health, issues and concerns, anxiety, depression among our young folks. And not just in this country. I think this is, nearly global, since the pandemic. So
Mhm.
so I think that there's a heightened awareness as to what now looks like, what anxiety looks like, and what depression looks like. And so it's much easier for people to go, "Oh my gosh, that's kind of what I've been dealing with." Maybe I didn't
Mhm.
realize it, because some people are like, I just feel off, or I don't want to talk to people. I don't want to go outside. I don't want to stay home. And, you know, because that's kind of what happened during the pandemic. And they're like, oh shit, just never really went to a doctor, never got diagnosed with, formally with anxiety and or depression. And I think that more people are realizing that, and there's the awareness has been heightened, that there's definitely some, conversation around this. And for men, we're like, I don't really, men, we're like, I'm depressed. Just depression sounds like something that you can control,
Right.
and I
Right.
think that that's, one of the, and there's now a lot of conversation about what you don't say to somebody who's dealing with depression, like, it's going to get better, or what do you have to be depressed about? You've got your life together. And and so
Right.
how it shows up, I think now, is it's a little bit like a diagnosis that is broad, and people are going, oh, I somewhere in that. And by the way, depression and anxiety are on a continuum, on the same continuum.
Right.
And so some people are trying to figure out, well, maybe I am kind of fall under that, one or the other.
Let me ask
So,
you this.
yeah,
I've been pretty open about emotions all my life. It's not really like a new thing per se. I imagine you pretty much have always been that way as well.
pretty much. Yeah.
So when did you kind of realize that men don't usually necessarily, you know, do that?
You mean talk about?
Yeah,
Do
yeah.
what? Do just talk about?
Express themselves or
Oh,
express
express themselves
feelings about.
emotionally.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know when it started. I just know that as I get older, and I here's let me rephrase that. I think for me personally, going through certain transitions and certain things in life have
Hmm.
exacerbated that. Some
Yeah.
of that emotionality. Lost my mom last year. A bunch of other things that are pretty significant,
Hmm.
made me realize, the kind of dealing with a lot of those emotions, and that things come up in light of that. And I think that most men think that you have to go through some sort of traumatic experience like that in order to express, or or yeah, exhibit some depression. And so that's
Right.
why I think men don't usually talk about it, because emotionally they're just like, oh, I'm just feeling off today, but not really digging much deeper than that. I don't know how that
Yeah, I
is
think it's
for you. Like,
well for me. What I found is that you know my inability to identify or my awakening and identifying where I might be dealing with either one of those things when it comes to anxiety or depression is in the fact that it's very insidious. Like you mentioned, you said you think you have to have this big breakdown or something um, major has to have occurred for you to have anxiety or depression. And then the other thing is for you to feel anxious or depressed. I'm not a clinician, but when we have one on the show as we come back to these topics, I'm sure I would imagine, and if there's any out there listening, I'm sure they would agree that one probably doesn't have to be diagnosed with anxiety or depression in order to feel anxious or depressed. If you go
yeah,
back to the way we think of mental health, you think, well, my mental health is fine. I don't have ill mental health, because when you think of mental health or a lack thereof, you think of someone who is um, crazy and I don't know, maybe like the Jimmy Stewart's movie Harvey, where he's the only person that sees a 6-foot rabbit or something crazy like that. But the truth of the matter is, your mental health is not optimum on a day where you just quote unquote don't feel right. And not feeling right as it accumulates can lead to a handful of a variety of things. Like, so for instance, for me, I've in one time in my life had what I think was a panic attack with some difficulty breathing, that kind of thing. It's still sort of a foreign thing. I'm still not even sure if what that was necessarily. So I can't think of times where I'm really even anxious. But if you think about when you're a kid and you have to go before the classroom and maybe give an oral presentation or something like that, if that's not second nature to you, um, that's some anxiety there. I realize with my anxiety as an adult comes more with anything, more than anything with um, our son Elijah. So Elijah just turned 18, and this is a whole nother topic, but related. When you're a caregiver or a parent to one with special needs, when that child turns 18, there's like a new diagnosis that takes place. At least that's what I feel like. It's like you're going over the same experience that you did with the diagnosis, which is how do we deal with these things that are taking place in terms of his difficulty adjusting to an adult school. Um, I'm not as patient as I don't know if I've ever been as patient as I'd like to be. My wife Laura has much more patience than me. Like last night, he was really upset because he couldn't get into a game or something like that on his iPad. And I was just telling her, "You're just so patient," because right now he's going through a thing where when he asks for something, He's like a dog with a bone and won't let go. He always has been, but now I'm even more so, just
Yeah.
latching on. And I'll tell her, I said, you're so patient. She goes, well, I don't have a choice, And she goes, what am I going to do? Go crazy? I said, but you know what? He seems to lean more on you when he asks. She said, well, because he knows I'm not going to go crazy. I said, well, I don't go crazy. She looks at me and like, well, you don't go crazy, but he's so in tune with what even the raise of an eyebrow from me or whatever have you, and so I realized that I need to sit back and be aware of my breathing and really stop and take a moment, because there's such immeasurable value in raising your consciousness, realizing, stepping outside of yourself, so to speak, to realize how things affect you. And the other thing I've been doing is on our Apple devices, there is in the health section, there's an opportunity to record your feelings. And so it gives a list of emotions. What are you feeling right now about health, money, finances, hobbies, purpose, partnership, marriage, family, whatever have you. And you can choose a range of the emotions, go back to it and look at it. And it almost serves as an emotional diary, because without doing something like that, whether you use that or some of the other apps that are out there, it's hard to realize how these things affect you. And over time, it's just like not getting much sleep. It's like, for lack of a better term, the death of 1,000 cuts, not a gash, so you don't realize how those things affect you. And it ties into then the other topic we're talking about here today, which isn't really separate, but the emotional toll of caregiving. I don't know. Those things really, really add up. Is there anything that you think?
Let me just say this, a couple things. So let me just address what you said, a couple things. So listen, there's a huge difference between an acute crisis and a chronic way of being, right? So when you're anxious about something specific, that's an acute crisis. That's something that happens in the moment. Oh, I've got to give a speech, or I've got a meeting. I just got called into a meeting, and that's, creates that anxiety. That's a lot different than sort of a chronic, a chronic aspect where it's long term. So people who have anxiety about specific issues, that's different than people who experience anxiety on a grand scale. And so, you're trying to, you just described what I would consider an acute crisis, and that's just handling, something immediately in front of you. And obviously there are things that you can do to alleviate that: breathing, meditation, that type of thing. But those folks who suffer with chronic anxiety, there's a lot more, chronic, what they call a chronic hardship, right? That's a lot different. There's something that no matter what, it's the solutions that handle the acute crisis situation don't serve the chronic hardship. They're different. They're just different. That's why people actually have to go on medication. And so, because it's something that sort of levels out their the metrics, or levels out their,
the system or whatever have you.
Yeah, for sure. So, and I think depression's the same way. I think there's some things that can make you depressed. UCLA lost to Indiana, and I was depressed for an hour about it, how horrible the season looks for UCLA football. But that's acute. That's not something that's long term. I'm not going to suffer over that long term. So I'm not going to be depressed about that. But chronic depression can be triggered by anything. And, how you deal with that versus the short-term acute thing is, again, significantly different. So I think that most men, when they're having the conversation about it, think about it in terms of the acute, not the chronic. And for caregivers, I think there's constant, the challenge is that there's constant stimuli that make it sort of additive and create a chronic situation. And that's something that we would serve us all well to have more open conversations about it, just so that people don't feel alone. It doesn't necessarily alleviate the depression, but to some degree, it, being able to talk about it openly and have a conversation is.
Right.
you know,
Um,
valuable.
and I just thought of something here. So this might completely throw you off because this is something that we've talked about in
Yeah,
you,
we none of us
how
planned anybody listening. Like we're just having a conversation. So this is not it's gonna
that's
throw me off,
literally
but
it. Literally.
right.
Well, we've talked about, and this is just, being open here. I have some of it. You have more of it. We've talked about support systems and traits in terms of being able to reach out to those that are there to support you. I've told you at times that I feel like I need to not take, and this is just between friends, and not take your resilience or you for granted, and like really maybe check in, like, hey, are you okay with so and so? How's this going on? Like even when you lost your mom, I
Yeah.
told you something about feeling like I think I took you for granted and that I wasn't really like digging to find out, hey, you okay? You okay? And because you're not the type of person that's going to be like, you got a minute? I'm not feeling so hot. Just kind of wanted to chat. Maybe not even chat about what I'm feeling about, but just talk, period. Whether it's a distraction or you're looking for advice or whatever have you. And some people are like that because of maybe the way they were raised. They're like, you know what? I just don't like asking for help. And in your case, we've talked about this. You will help others at the drop of a hat, but unless you're drowning, maybe in some cases, even if you are, you're not going to raise a hand and ask for help. You're
No,
less likely to.
no, for sure. And I learned at a very young age that, asking for help was not asking for help was a sign of weakness and a sign of, of vulnerability. And, my father Middle Eastern descent. And so he was, very much into, you know, the illusion of, masculinity. I call it the illusion because, I find those that are hyper masculine are also fraught with more insecurities than a lot of people.
Yeah, the
Um,
bigger the mask.
him included, for sure, for sure. So yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it wasn't something that was acknowledged, rewarded, supported. I didn't benefit from having a conversation saying, "Hey, I need help." And in fact, it was sort of openly discussed. Of all of the kids in my family, that there was a belief that, oh, Brian's going to go live, somewhere on his own and never talk to us again when he becomes an adult because he's the one who can handle life, you know, on his own.
yeah.
I could go back to tons of conversations around that, but the reality is, that's kind of what happens. And I think, by the way, not to totally, stereotype it, but middle children, have that issue a lot. There's an older child and the youngest child, and the one in between. A lot of times they're like, well, you don't need as much help as the oldest one. You don't need as much help as the youngest one, and so you're constantly in this mode of, you know, reluctant to raise your hand for help. And I will say this, I appreciate you. It's not something that I'm always, that comfortable with, when people say, are you okay? Do you need help? But I will say this, I did reach out to my older brother about a month and a half ago.
Mhm.
And because I'd had a point where I was feeling a lot of stuff between, you know, wars overseas, the election process, and just the crap on social media, discussions on
Mhm.
social media, and realizing how real, how here's what I noticed, and maybe this is helpful for some people, that I was reacting to things and I felt a bit out of integrity. Like the reaction that I had to certain things that I was seeing on social media, there's a part of me that was just like, well, I'm just going to answer this question. Blah, blah. But then I realized like, that's not really who I am. And the more I felt out of place or out of joint, the
Mhm.
more I realized like, what's the bigger issue there? And in
And
fact, I
tell
talked
him
to my brother.
it was me.
Well, to tell the story, Sean posted something on social media. My initial reaction was like, why would you do that? Like, because it felt like the comment that Sean had made was ancillary to the message that he was reporting on. And I realized, like, that's, first of all, it's not my social media. It's not none of my business. Second of all, I just felt like, wow, my reaction was so strong. Where is that coming from?
And he had
And
a
I
point.
realized,
He had a point for those listening. It wasn't what you said. It was how you said it. You said it in a manner that isn't who you are. But if we weren't who we are, I wouldn't be able to sit back and go, and ask you about it and have a conversation. And you wouldn't be
yeah,
able to have had a conversation with yourself and said, that's not me. If we were younger or other people, there would be an argument or a rift or something like that.
yeah, yeah. No, for sure, for sure. I mean, I knew right away once I hit the response, and thinking about the situation, that it was just, and honestly, my brother's suggestion was take a break from social media and see how you feel.
I was gonna say,
And
tell them what you did. Yeah.
yeah, and so I literally deleted all my social media, with the exception of Facebook. The only reason I keep Facebook is because of our podcast. But I don't post on Instagram. I deleted TikTok from everything, and a lot of the social media stuff. And by the way, that happened on a Friday that I was going camping with some friends and fraternity brothers from school. And that weekend, I didn't do a lot of activities. I really just I took a walk by myself. I was, in nature. We were near the beach. And I will tell you, since then, it was August 10th. I'll tell you exactly what it was because I know exactly what it was. I have not only do I feel relieved. I don't feel as triggered by stuff, but I've also gained back so much time. Like I read through my newsletters now in the morning, and I'm done it. Like 2 hours I've gained every day from not reading, commenting, posting, responding, and being triggered by anything on social media. And it has made me feel that, the issues that a lot of folks have with social media for our kids, there's validity to it because it does create a false sense of social, social commentary and social mores, because we're dealing with, first of all, we're dealing with bots. We're dealing with anonymous people. We're dealing with fake accounts, and we're dealing with people post stuff. Generally, it's any company can put out a press release about all the good stuff happening, right? And if you read a company's press releases, you're like, oh my God, this company's really doing well. But the press release only shows good stuff. It doesn't show what's going on in the company. Same with social media. People are posting stuff on social media that is like, look at all the great things that I'm doing. Look at my great meal I just had, right? All that stuff. So it's not really a full picture. And yet we respond to people's comments as if that defines who they are in the world. And so I think there's a lot to be said for, the impact that social media has on our mental health. And I think anybody who, if you're feeling especially anxiety and depression, man, it just feels like you start following stuff that feeds your anxiety and feeds your depression. You're going to find more stuff that feeds your anxiety and your depression. It becomes a cycle. Like we said, it's an echo chamber, when people are posting stuff that you believe in, right? And it's just basically same thing exists for anxiety and depression. It becomes a self-fulfilling issue.
Yeah. One of the things I'm going to do, and we don't, and nor do I get paid for this, but I believe people have always, said I was going to do this at the end of the show, but I may again, but I think it's worthwhile to do beforehand. Service to others is the rent we pay for our room on earth, right? The great words of the great Muhammad Ali. If you have a good experience someplace, why not share it with others? And I happen to subscribe to the app Calm, and it's been a great help. Elijah and I have sat and done, meditations every now and then. We kind of get off course and on schedule. But I'm going to share in the show notes and on the screen, there's a link tied to my account, which allows me to share a 7-day trial. Go ahead, check it out. There's a handful of people on there with some names you recognize that have what they call sleep stories and things of that sort. There's a variety of different types of meditation and everything. And I think there's just some immeasurable value in getting quiet for a minute and being able to answer in the deepest form, who am I? Who am I either in a moment? Who am I generally in life? Who do I want to become? Am I who I hope to become? And even for people that are successful, the things aren't who they are. So um, people matter, things don't, and that can get very difficult in this society to remember, especially when you're focused on that who matters and really needs so much of you, and that is the person for whom you are caring, as a caregiver. So again, I'll share it on the screen one more time, and then again at the end of the show. It's it's a free trial at Calm. You get 7 days. There's a variety of meditations there. Go ahead and feel free to check it out. But I think we need to be able to lean on each other. I think men need to be able to do that as well too, which isn't something that, just as we will resist the urge to express hey, here's how I feel. We tend to, resist the urge to, lean on each other and just like, hey, you got a minute? I'm feeling X, Y, and Z, and the one thing I've come to realize in the conversations that you and I have is that the support around me is, it's immeasurable in value, and not everybody necessarily has that. So we need to make sure that we take stock of the support that we have. And then at the same time, make sure that you make yourself as available as you can. So, not to the point of your own detriment, but as much as you can to be that support system for someone else as well.
Yeah, I agree. And, I sit on the board of We Are Brave Together, and that organization supports women caregivers, moms, and women caregivers, and there's a constant conversation around supporting caregivers and the issues that they, including anxiety and depression. And it's interesting. We had a board retreat recently, and we were having a conversation where a lot of anxiety comes from is in the very beginning, and then depression becomes the thing that hangs on, and so one converts to the other. So the very beginning with the diagnosis, people experience a lot of anxiety, don't know what it means, because it's it's the unknown, right? You're feeling anxious about what's to come, and then there's a transition to some degree into grief. And where the depression comes in a lot of times is in the beginning of a diagnosis. There's a lot of people around who, like, all of a sudden family's very concerned and wants to help, and friends want to help. It's like the death of somebody,
Yes.
where they're like they're there, and then they eventually go off, and obviously they've got their own lives and they do their own thing and they go away, and you're left alone to deal with what you're dealing with. And then it becomes again, acute versus chronic, right? Now it becomes a chronic situation where you're going to have to deal with, the things that come up. And a lot of times you're dealing with your own anxiety and depression around, the grief that comes from losing the image of what you thought your life was going to look like for yourself and for your loved one.
Exactly.
And then how do you, how do you deal with that on a long-term basis? And so having support groups like We Are Brave Together and the Den that we have for men is a that's helpful to have, not just reminders, but just somebody who can, empathize and say, yeah, well, I've been through the same thing, and, this helps me, however it comes up. But
yeah, no, definitely. And I'm learning a whole new, ton of things with regard to the caregiving aspect. In other words, where we are as a country, in terms of the way caregivers are supported, especially in comparison to the way that takes place in other parts of the world. Quite frankly, we're not as advanced there. And, working in financial services, we talk about putting plans in place for a time when one exists in memory only. But caregiving is something that everyone is guaranteed to be a part of if you're blessed with an even average lifespan at some point. And it's not something that people kind of, prepare for, but it's something that everybody should prepare for on the financial front. But what happens is as you're raising your consciousness in terms of, wait a minute, how do I even, feel right now? How does this thing affect me? How does that affect me? There's nothing that can really prepare you for having to deal with that. And again, in our situation, it's not like people who have someone who is severely aged or in a otherwise chronic situation, but putting certain things in place in terms of your mental preparation can go a long way in addition to making sure that there's some kind of support system in place for you.
For sure. No, I agree.
Yeah.
Sorry, there was nothing for me to add after that. That was good. That was good.
That's okay.
That was good stuff.
We had the two topics. So we've got like a considerably long list, a list of topics and then subtopics underneath. So since we've still got time, we're only halfway through the show. The other one I look at is feelings of guilt, shame, or inadequacy. I think that's one that more men could probably relate to than almost anything else. And what I'll do is I'll start by saying that I manufacture a certain amount of I manufacture successfully my feelings of guilt and inadequacy, but I don't know about necessarily shame, maybe even shame. And the inadequacy, it's within a moment, which is why it's manufactured. Let me explain. If my wife asks me to do something, like some honey do something, whether it's something around the house or get something from the store or whatever have you, I tend to treat that if I fail at it, like, or I forget or something, if I'm not successful at completing the task, unless I go to a store and they're out of something, in some cases even then, I figure I just need to find it. I tend to make more out of it than is necessary. And as open as she and I are with each other, I wasn't being open about how those things would make me feel. And I didn't even realize that it was so natural. Like maybe I'm supposed to get something from the store or whatever have you. And I would act like a caveman who left the cave with a spear and came back empty handed, and it's like, I did not find any food today. Just like such a horrible thing, or some medieval, I have failed thee. I could not find anything to kill. And we had a joke about it. I didn't even realize, because there was something that happened and I didn't necessarily, when I shared it, her reaction had me feeling like, what was I expecting? What was I really thinking? So when you add the caregiving factor, the other thing is, as a caregiver, and I think as a man as well, you want the S on your chest, on your suit, to be twice as visible and bright, for your cape to be 10 times as strong and your chest out or whatever have you. And depending on, where you place that value and how you respond to it, you can make more out of something than needs to be. So I don't necessarily feel like, oh, I'm an inadequate man per se, but in a given moment, it's just like, damn, I got to do better with that. Or just at times not even able to, at its worst, I'm not able to verbalize it. And I'm just like, oh, why do I even feel this way? Why is it that bad? But again, when it's let out and the conversation is had and then her reaction is given, I was like, kind of like,
what was her reaction? Like, you didn't say what her reaction was. What was her reaction?
It was just very minimal, like, okay. And then I remember trying to think, like, what was I really expecting? And it was so much a me thing. It wasn't anything about, some of it is knowing who you're with. Okay. Is that the type of person that's really going to get upset about that? But then you're like, why are you that upset? And because by the same token, if I do the simplest thing, I don't know, like I said, getting milk from the store or something, I don't know, when I do that and there's just a thank you, I'm just like, you're welcome, good citizen. You feel like some big hero, like you just, flew 20 feet in the air to get a cat out of the tree, and that's just a me thing. I don't necessarily know what that means or what that is, but I faced it and I know what it is. And it's allowed me to channel it in the right way. It serves me because I know that I feed off of it in terms of helping others and everything. And then that's the other thing too, which is kind of a whole other discussion, but related, is that if you're, so we're service-oriented individuals, you and I, that's what this podcast is about. That's what our business is about. and we tie our dollars to purpose, and we help people where there's no dollar in there, well, because we just like that and feel that way. And so what happens is, if you're not careful being someone that does that externally, you can also sacrifice your role at home if you're not careful. You're so busy trying to save the world and asleep to everybody around you too. That's a whole nother conversation, but that comes into the whole. Those are just the things that I deal with.
Yeah, I hear you. And let's go back. I want to go back to the other thing first for a second. I think that, what happens is, if there's a certain awareness, right? And as you get older, you become more aware of a lot of things. You become more aware of your sort of internal machinery. And but when you're younger, you tend to ignore a lot of the internal signs and respond the way you're supposed to respond as a man.
Right.
You do things that you're expected to do. Right.
Right.
And so the more evolved that we become, the more in tune we get with that internal / external, dichotomy. And the more aligned those two can be, the more in integrity you are, right? You have integrity when the reason why you feel off, or is it you have an awareness of your internal machine, but you're not honed in to understand what it is. You're aware. So sometimes you'll feel off. You'll do something like, I don't know why I don't feel good about this, but I don't feel good about this.
Right.
It means it's sort of like you're hearing the signal internally, but you're not able to decipher what it's telling you. Right. You just know that it's off. And so the more aware that we can become of that internal dialogue, that's why I said, like, for me, I knew that the minute that I snapped, that didn't feel right, but I was aware enough of what was going on to understand that it was coming from a place of, out of integrity with kind of who I am in the world. And so I think that a lot of, work can be done, and things like calm and meditation and, guided meditation in some cases where you can quiet the external and listen to the internal a little bit and get an understanding of what that's like. It benefits us. And as men, again, we tend to ignore that stuff. I was working for my dad when I was young. I was probably 15, and I was not feeling well. And I remember getting sick in the back room, and I was sick. I was really sick. And I went upstairs to tell my dad, look, I can't work. I'm really sick. I just got sick in the back, in the back room. And his response wasn't about my feeling sick or having to go home or anything. It was, his first response was, did you clean it up? And the message I got, was like, don't complain about being sick. That's the messages we sort of unconsciously tell ourselves. Don't tell anybody when you're sick. Don't tell anybody when you're hurting, because, make sure you got your shit cleaned up. Excuse me for saying it that way, but, right? Clean it up. Right. And so that was sort of the internal messaging but that didn't feel right to me, and it hasn't felt right to me. And I think, again, as I've evolved as a human being, I've realized that the more that I can be in tune with my internal messaging, the more, again, in integrity I feel. Sometimes, by the way, it'll be a very direct comment that other people may take offense, and so again, that's the other side of it, where I have to have integrity internally, but also, have some responsibility for. I don't have complete responsibility for how other people are going to react, but being aware that there could create a reaction when you respond a certain way, is the other side of it. But I think the truer that we are, and by the way, Abraham Hicks, people who follow those, that's always like, there's your, it's your internal messaging. It's, it's important. It's kind of who you are, who the world, the universe, and the source know you to be. Right.
Exactly. So, and that's why I always talk about questions are more powerful than statements. And one of the greatest books out there on the subject is, a book called What to Say When Talking to Yourself by Dr. Shad Helmstetter. It's a great book. You can find it on Amazon. You should check it out. I mean, because we not only is what we say to ourselves the most powerful because it's subconscious, but because it is, you're not thinking about what it is that what you do say to yourself. So that's why, I will literally ask myself the questions. And I talked about dealing with, when you talk about whether it's inadequacy or whatever the case might be, I'm like, wait a minute, why do I feel this way in this given moment? Well, it's because I expect this reaction, because I'm also thinking that because I put such a high level of importance on the task or the chore or whatever have you, that it's going to be treated the same way, and that's just not always true. We have to ask ourselves the right questions.
Yeah, and I totally agree, and I think, and we've had this conversation in the den, several times. A lot of times, you've got to be tuned into the the difference between how you feel about your situation with your subject, your caregiving subject, your son or your mother or whatever it is, and external responses to that, right? And not giving a crap about what other people out there in the world think, where you're like, oh, I'm concerned that somebody is going to make a judgment about my child, or somebody's going to say this or that. Sort of like,
It's a you thing.
It is a you thing, and it creates conflict, internal conflict, because the reality, you're so concerned about what somebody else is thinking, or what somebody else may think, or what they may think, that you allow it to drive your
being,
what's happening in the moment. And so again, having a little bit more confidence and truth and ability to tap into your internal dialogue and maintaining your integrity makes that less impactful. Or you don't care that much about, I don't care what about other people think about my kid. You know what I mean? I mean, obviously I want my kid to be, a good citizen in the world and treat people respectfully.
Right.
But whether they have a judgment about him, I go around the world changing people's judgments about my child.
No, not at all. And there's something else to be said for the fact that you cannot care what people think and still care about people.
For sure.
They're not the same thing.
Yeah, it's sort of like, what's the saying? Your opinion is of no concern to me, right?
Yeah. Your opinion of me is none of my business. Yeah.
Your opinion of me is none of my business. Your opinion of me doesn't pay my bills. I don't care. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So again, having that, being able to stay true to that, your what I call it, your true north, your true being, right? Is more important than worried about what other, because the reality is, going back to the whole thing that we talk about every time we end the show, is I don't know what's going on in somebody else's life. I don't know what's happening in their world. And so if they have a judgment, that's on them, right? It's not about me. It's that great scene from Ted Lasso, season 1, episode 8. I like when he's playing darts, and said other people's opinion had nothing to do with me. How other people judged me had nothing to do with me. It was more about them.
Yeah.
Right. And that is a critical thing. It's such a powerful statement to say, your thoughts about me are not of my concern. Right. Or your thoughts about my child.
Yeah. And look, just because it's true doesn't mean that it's easy to do. It's easier said than done, but so very worthy.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And culture plays a role in all these different things too. Exactly how we're raised, who and where we come from. That's when we actually have guests. We begin with them like, what's the story of your origin? How does that, who and where'd you come from, figuratively and literally, because that determines how we deal with everything, including a diagnosis or a life situation that has you become a caregiver, especially if it's something that's sudden too. So all those things
for sure
play a role. Yeah, most definitely. We're getting towards the end of the time. We got a little bit more time than we might, ordinarily have. But the one thing we want to do is we want to make sure that our value is high and that it's authentic as well. So you won't find us in a situation where we're trying to, speak just to speak because we're at a certain point of time. I don't know where else we necessarily go with what we've shared here today. Is there anything else that you want to touch on?
Yeah, listen, I feel no, this is not something that's like, it's not a sitcom, right? Where it all gets tied up nice and neatly at the end, or
right.
This is a conversation that is important to have and ongoing. And as a reminder, I feel like I'm a fairly evolved person, and 6 weeks ago, I still needed a little reminder, like, hey, there's some things that you can do to get back into, integrity with who you are. So I think it's, constant. It's a constant conversation, especially as men who were like, yeah. Okay, cool. On to the next thing. What's this? What's happening? What do I do next? Like, how do I fix things? Right. So I think that, it's a good conversation to have, and realizing, first of all, a couple things. Anxiety and depression, they're on the same continuum, and it is happening everywhere in our society, and it has been exacerbated since the pandemic, and a lot of people are dealing with it. And the great thing about it is that when it becomes so pervasive, that there are a lot of people, companies, organizations that pop up to serve and deal with those kinds of things. And so the great thing to know is that, there are some solutions, and there are places that you can go, and there are resources that you can have access to. Again, for moms, we are Brave Together. For us, we have the Den, where we can have open conversations and ongoing conversations. So those are, good places to have. And then, mental health, you will see, I believe that the mental health, and you see a lot of stuff on commercials now, and becoming more of the public consciousness discussing, issues of mental health and getting, listen, we had it with Simone Biles, right? We see professional athletes dealing with mental health issues and breakdowns, and we see it with, celebrities. And so even those people who would seem to have it all together, who are on a path and a track that has them be in the ultimate, mental, condition, because they're working towards having mental toughness, even those folks are struggling. So if those folks are struggling, it's okay to go, shit, I'm struggling with this as well. And as a caregiver with a lot of external, stimulus, you can get caught up in a cycle. And so, I always tell people, reach out, and ask for help, even though I'm the worst at it. I see the value of it. And hopefully people have a partner in Thrive, like I do, who calls and says, "Are you okay? Is everything okay? How are you?" If I'm quiet for a little while, Sean's like, "Are you okay?" Just check it in. And so I'm grateful for that. And I wish I knew how to do that. My brain isn't wired that way. And I think I have a couple of ex-wives that would absolutely agree with that. That sometimes that's a problem, and I don't know how to do that. Yet I love being a recipient of that. So it just shows you that there's certain things that you believe have value, and yet if your brain's not wired to do it, it's difficult, right? And so that's okay.
Can be. Yeah.
And I could build stuff in to make it happen, but I just, then it would feel inauthentic because I don't know how to. It's not how my brain is wired. Anyways, I'm very appreciative of you in this conversation. So,
as am I. And and again, you're acknowledging it. Do everything you can to just continue to raise your consciousness. One of the things, if you're like me and you're someone who enjoys letting other people know that you're there, over the past month and a half, I've experienced a lot of loss, personally and vicariously, whether it's celebrities, and in some cases people that I know that knew those people, as well as family members that I've lost, which just lets us know that life is short, and tomorrow's a whole bunch of things and not a promise. So one good thing to do, which I it's like ebb and flow. Sometimes I'm better at it than others, but I'll pick one or two people to just let them know I'm thinking of them. And something that you and I talked about before, which was, think of the people that you love, and send them a quick note and tell them exactly why. Exactly why.
Yeah, sure.
Most people don't know that. So with that said, We're gonna wrap up the show again. Encourage you to check out Billy Footwear. The link that is in the show notes and that is on the screen now gives you a 10% discount. We're honored to be in partnership with them. Anything else you want to add as well, Brian?
Yeah. Hopefully, people seeing some new branding. We've got some new things that we're working on for Just Two Dads and our outreach and the things that we are doing on a going forward basis that we're proud of, and you're going to see more of it, so we can reach as broad an audience as we possibly can and encourage ongoing conversation around these kinds of subjects and a lot of other things and resources to help support efforts of caregivers everywhere. So very appreciative again of this platform.
Yes.
So as we wrap, we're not asking the question today, are we?
No, I was going to, but no,
okay.
We'll save it.
No, okay, good. That's good. So we'll begin the sign-off process. Thanking everybody for catching up, and Alfredo, thanks for your comment, and for people who have caught us on Facebook Live, appreciate you very much. And again, hope we add value. Catch us on our own website at justtwodadspodcast.com and YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to all of that stuff. And if you're hearing us on a podcast outlet, reach out to us on our on our email address. We are justtwodads@gmail.com. Just let us know that a topic resonated with you, or or made you think of something else, or anything you want to contribute. We love hearing from folks. We have been able to further our reach because people who have commented to us made introductions to us, and those have resulted in introductions. And we've been doing this now for 4 years because the circle of people involved in the caregiving community is significant, broad, and very, very interrelated. So reach out to us at wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. And as I say, again, empathy and love, as we've mentioned, if you see somebody in their situation, have some empathy because you do not know what they're going through. If somebody responds to you in a negative way and it seems out of place, have some empathy. You don't know what they're going through. They may have been just gone through something and something got triggered them. And then if you see the world through the lenses of love, the world's just a much better place. So with that, throw it off to you to sign us off. This is a great episode.
Thank you so much, any and everyone listening within the sound of our voice. And if whether you're catching us live or looking at us on our YouTube channel, looking at it on a video, be sure to like, subscribe, and share. And remember, questions are a lot more powerful than statements. We should try to be more childlike, less childish. And everybody needs the same thing. Everybody needs to be seen, needs to be heard, needs to know that they matter, and needs to know that they are loved. So thank you so very much. We've got some great stuff coming up. Like we said, great episodes and some fantastic guests and partnerships. We'll see you next time around. Thank you so much. We love you.
Thanks, everybody. Love you. See you again soon.